been another busy week for us in Westminster. Rishi Sunak's premiership faced the possibility of yet another major Tory rebellion after Sir Simon Clarke called for him to be replaced. But how much damage has this lone wolf attempt done to the Tories? I'll be asking the former Justice Secretary, Sir Robert Buckland, for his thoughts on the sentencing of the Nottingham killer Valdo Callacane. Did he get away with murder? I'll be speaking to Kemi Badenoch, the woman tipped to be the next Tory leader, live in the studio. And after Holocaust Memorial Day yesterday, I'll be joined by the former chair of the Jewish Labour movement, Ivor Kaplan. Does Labour still have an anti-Semitism issue? I'll also be grilling former MEP and Boris Johnson backer David Campbell Bannerman about his right-wing splinter group, the Conservative Democratic Organisation. Is this the vehicle for a Cincinnati-style blonde comeback? And talking of blonde comebacks, Donald Trump has stormed to victory in the second primary in New Hampshire this week. I'll be asking his former press secretary, Stephanie Grisham, if he can make America great again. Well, before we get into all of that, and as you can see, it's a jam-packed show, very much looking forward to Kemi coming into the studio a little later. But let's go through the papers first of all with Michael Portillo, former Defence Secretary, and my fellow GB News presenter who'll be with you from 11. Michael, lovely to see you this morning. What a busy morning for you. You're prepping a show and you're doing my paper review.
I couldn't be more delighted. It's lovely to be with you.
Lovely to be with you. And let's pick a story first of all that is very much down your street as a former Defence Secretary. Once again, we've got headlines in the Sunday Telegraph this time. UK warships lack firepower to take out Houthi bases. There's this constant string of stories, isn't there, about us being under-defended. We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous, at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me, because I've always thought these aircraft carriers were entirely a vanity project.
Really?
An aircraft carrier is an enormous target.
Yes.
And if one of these were hit and sunk, we would lose £3 billion worth of ship, £2 billion worth of aircraft and 2,000 personnel.
Yeah.
And we're never going to risk doing that. Aircraft carriers are huge things. They need to be defended. We don't have the ships to defend them. So
then it begs the question, why have them? OK. I mean, you're painting a pretty appalling picture.
The picture is indeed appalling. And there's no point having the aircraft carriers. The aircraft carriers could only operate in conjunction with allies. We need allies to defend them. There is some question as to whether the aircraft carrier is now out of date because of the advance in ballistic missile technology. And we're learning a lot from the Ukraine war, for example. We're learning how even quite small powers with sort of improvised weaponry can take out big ships. The Ukrainians have been very successful. They don't even have a navy to speak of. They're being successful against the Russian navy. So I think we're invested, in the wrong things, and our kit is unreliable, not available, and not equipped for purpose.
How worried are you about what's been going on in the Middle East and beyond with regard to where we might lie in this whole conflict? Because we've also had warnings that we might be at war with Russia in 20 years' time. I'm
hugely worried. And I think the other thing that hugely worries me is there's virtually no political reaction in this country.
Yes.
Despite all the things that are happening, the invasion of Ukraine and then everything around Gaza and Israel and the Red Sea, it hasn't sent a shockwave through the political system in Britain. We don't have a government saying, right, all bets are off. We're now going to have to rethink our defence policy. Indeed, the posture of Grant Shapps is, oh, no, I'm not going to rethink my defence policy. So, that's, I think, what most worries me, that politicians want to pretend to the public that nothing has changed. I fear lots has changed.
We could talk about that all morning, but let's move on to the next story. There's a really interesting investigation by the Insight team on the Sunday Times suggesting that foreign students are getting a secret route to top universities. They don't need to get as higher grades as UK students wanting to get into Russell Group institutions.
The thing that depresses me about this story is that yet another British institution is shown not to be working. And until recently, the universities used to be a great source of pride for Britain. We're very close to the top of the league tables in the world for universities. But what's happening is that the amount that the universities can charge British students has hardly risen since David Cameron became Prime Minister. So it's a maximum of £9,250, £1,000, £9,250. And so the universities are turning to foreign students who pay up to £38,000. But it turns out that these foreign students don't even have to be properly qualified. They can come through a backdoor route whereby they can come in with minimal qualifications, really minimal qualifications, and they get in and the university get 38,000. By the way, the universities are paying huge commissions to bring these people in. They're paying agencies and so on. And of course, it brings down the standard of achievement of the university and may well impact the experience of the other students. If you're in classes and seminars with students who are simply not up to it, then of course the course is going to be slowed down, or British students are going to have to rely more on their own resources. So I'm sure that it is depressing the quality of British universities.
But also, if in this great experiment of social mobility that was trying to send more children to university back in Blair's day, you have a comprehensively educated child who's done really well at school. They then get the 3 A's or the 3 A stars, whatever it is that they need to get into a Russell Group. They then found out that they've missed out on a place because somebody's been imported from overseas with 3 C's rather than 3 A's. How is that fair?
And then they may find their lecturers are on strike anyway. No, it's
damning indictment.
It's another miserable situation.
It's too. Tories torn apart is the headline we've put on the next section. We've got Dan Hodges writing in the Mail on Sunday about Rishi having to call the bluff of rebels, just like John Major did. Does he?
No, I think there's a bit of journalism. What John Major did was very interesting. I didn't think it was advisable. But 2 years before the election, in 1995, he said, I'm stepping down as leader and immediately presenting myself as candidate again, calling the bluff of the rebels. So, in fact, what happened was, I've forgotten his name now. John, what's his name?
Redwood.
Redwood. I couldn't get his name.
It's all right.
John Redwood stood against him, but Major was the victor. So Major established then that he was the leader and he wasn't going to be challenged in the next 2 years up to the election. We're now in election year.
Yeah.
Rishi can't do the same thing.
Is this ludicrous then? The idea of deposing Rishi now, is it for the birds?
Completely for the birds.
What if it gets even worse, the budget doesn't go down very well, doesn't move the dial, Farage announces his retaking the helm of reform, and at that point you see reform and the Conservatives both polling at 20%?
Well, the Tories, in my view, are stuck with Rishi, and if they decide to have a leadership election, in my view, they would do even worse than sticking with Rishi.
What about my guest who's coming on later in the show? Kemi Badenoch takes the reins. I mean, she said that she doesn't want to. There's a few briefings that I'm going to put to her.
Well, of course she doesn't want to.
Because she doesn't want to lead the Tories to defeat.
But I can't understand her wanting to lead the Tories after defeat either, for that matter, because,
really?
Well, if the Tories are reduced to a rump, they won't be back at the following election. They won't be back within 5 years. They'll be out for 10 years as a minimum. Who wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party after this defeat?
It will be in opposition.
It will be a rump and irrelevant. No one will want to listen to a word that the leader says.
Yeah.
And that leader will lose the following election, in my view, and therefore it's not a position that anyone should want to hold.
But you speak with wisdom and experience there, because there are these mad Tory MPs who are saying, oh, maybe we need a period in opposition. And I keep on thinking, what are you talking about?
Well, they're going to have a period in opposition, but they need to recognise that it probably won't be 5 years, it will be more.
And it won't be much fun either.
And it won't be any fun.
Having said that, Badenoch sacking Henry Staunton as the chairman of the post office, I mean, they said that he left by mutual agreement, but I think we pretty much know what's happened.
Yes.
I mean, isn't that a little bit of manoeuvring? Isn't that trying to send a message to the public that she's quite tough and that she can take difficult decisions?
It may be. I mean, it seems to be shrouded in mystery as to what's happened. There seems possibly to have been a row about who should be the lead independent director on the Post Office Board. What I think is worth noting is that royal assent was given to the Post Office Horizon Compensation Bill the other day, which means that that is underway. Now, I don't know whether the chairman of the Post Office plays any part now in the government-backed scheme, which is going to compensate the postmasters, hopefully this year, hopefully before the general election. So there may have been a bit of grandstanding here, I don't know. But what she said on other channels this morning was that she'd given him a chance and he wasn't the man for the job. No, well, we'll push a little further on that for some more detail. Finally, I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama. And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened? I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first, because you will soon be incapable of helping anybody else. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously. So there's been this furore over the way that this man has been executed, but actually, in comparison to lethal injection or other methods, it may well be more humane. Although I know you don't believe in the death penalty anyway. One of the things that the programme found out was that the lethal injection had been invented by someone who was unqualified to invent it, and no research had been done on it before it was introduced. So seriously, if the state of Oklahoma, which is where the story came about, if the state of Oklahoma was prepared to switch to hypoxia because they'd seen a BBC programme with me in it, that would be another complete lack of evidence and science in order to introduce a new death penalty. Bit of a stretch.